now and again it's Nickel-Dare, Rocky Glen. Ain't it so? Okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again it's Nickel-Dare, Rocky Glen.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Rocky Glen Park Memories. I'm your host, Andy Zahorski, sometimes known as Zeke, and I can't thank everybody enough for coming back yet again. So I want to give a shout out to the group, the Facebook group. So we have nearly 15,000 members, which is astonishing for an amusement park that's been gone for 33 years. The amount of photos and videos that we've been shared recently are great. I can't thank everybody enough, and I hope we keep participating and finding those photos and laying around and sharing them with the group, because this is how we preserve history. So, speaking of history, this episode focuses on one ride as opposed to having the maps that we did in the last one, which basically covered everything in the park itself. And this focuses on the Mountain Dips Coaster. And that's because we are on its 100th anniversary of its opening, which was August 5th, 1920. And of course, August 5th, 2020 will be the 100th anniversary of it opening. And why is it important? Because it's been lost over time. Nobody remembers it. Nobody ever rode it, unless you're 110 years old, and you'd only be 10 years old at that point. But our grandparents and great-grandparents most likely rode this coaster, and it was their coaster. And it's just been lost over time. And I think it's important to document it so that we can explain the rides to the future generations who want to know what was at Rocky Glen at one time. Some people just don't understand what Rocky Glen meant to our area. I can tell you, the young people who watch this video and don't understand what Rocky Glen meant to us. Imagine if Knoebels closed next year. It's just gone. That's what we had with Rocky Glen. Rocky Glen was here, and then it closed for the season, and then next year it was gone. So if you can imagine what Knoebels would be like if it was gone tomorrow, that's what Rocky Glen meant to us. It was a great place to go, lots of food, and then it was just gone. Never had a final day. So that's why Rocky Glen still has that aura of importance in our area. So let's watch the video, and we'll learn about 1919. That was the beginning of the golden age of Rocky Glen. And then we'll focus on 1920, and then we'll talk about the demise of the coaster and where Rocky Glen went from there. So I hope you enjoy it. The year is 1919, and Rocky Glen is poised to become a destination in the Wyoming and Lackawanna valleys once again. Rocky Glen had been closed on and off since 1913. No rides existed at the park at this time, only the basics, just like a state park. Boating, swimming, fishing. Of course, dancing was popular as well. Edwin E.S. Williams, who built the dam at Rocky Glen, won half of the park in a lawsuit with Arthur Frothingham, so he owned the eastern half of the park, but unfortunately he wasn't that much of a park guy himself. But he felt it was time to do something with the park. E.S. Williams goes into business with a man named Anthony A.J. Duffy. Now, A.J. Duffy was an entertainment guy. He had previously been the manager of the Lyceum Theater up in Scranton. But even before that, he was the manager of the Scranton Luna Park. Now, the Luna Park only lasted for several years, unfortunately burning in a fire in 1916. But when Luna Park was gone and Rocky Glen vacant, it left a void in the valley, and A.J. Duffy and E.S. Williams concocted a plan to bring back Rocky Glen as the destination. With the agreements in place with E.S. Williams, A.J. Duffy gets ready to reopen Rocky Glen. It mentions in this 1919 article that Rocky Glen wants to get a roller coaster, signifying that they have big plans in store. An overture is made to both Arthur Frothingham and Annette Reynolds to see if they'll sell their half of the park to E.S. Williams, but it doesn't go anywhere. Eventually, they sell their half to Nallen and Jennings Park Company in 1921. But Andy, where is that dividing line at? Well, the best way to show you that is by using the 1939 flyover. 1939 flyover is the closest thing we can get to 1919, so this one will have to suffice. This is where the separations of the park existed. You have the right half of the yellow line, which was the A.J. Duffy side, where he was the manager and E.S. Williams was the landowner, and then you have the left side of the park, which was Arthur Frothingham and Annette Reynolds. They were both the landowners and the park managers. So this yellow line is where the split of the park existed. You'll notice, as in previous videos, the yellow line separates the dance hall, also known as the Golden Nugget Casino, down the middle. This was the location of the spite fence as it was known back in those days, where initially it was a wooden fence, but later replaced with a concrete wall. As you can see on the right side of the yellow line, there really isn't much area to put a roller coaster in. Most of this area is surrounded by water, so it presented an intriguing issue because the Laurel line also went through this area and had a third rail which was charged with electricity. So that presented a problem because the people could not walk to the other side of the tracks and use the area that's in front of the dam. So if they wanted to use this area for a roller coaster, since it essentially was off limits to people walking in the park, they needed to bring in experts to both build the coaster and design it in the unique terrain that was the Duffy side of Rocky Glen. By the end of the summer season in 1919, the resurgence of Rocky Glen was seen as a great success in ownership's eyes. There was so much excitement with the park that it even had the Irish Republic president Eamon de Valera hold a rally while visiting Scranton, where thousands upon thousands filled the park to hear him speak. It was official. Rocky Glen was seen as a destination once again, and while it wasn't known back then, it was leaving the pioneer era behind, and for the next 20 years was entering the golden age of Rocky Glen Park, and the plans for its next coaster since the Figure 8 was torn down in 1913 were about to be in full swing for 1920. Okay guys, that was 1919 at Rocky Glen. Now we're going to move ahead to 1920. And a lot of big things are coming for Rocky Glen as it enters the golden age. So the biggest, of course, is going to be the roller coaster that they're going to get. Now the roller coaster they had in the early parts in the pioneer years, which was 1904 to 1913, it was a figure 8 coaster. It's a common figure 8 coasters that were all over the world. But this was going to be something different, something big. And it's going to bring a lot of people to the park. So let's jump ahead to 1920 and let's learn about the history of the Mountain Dips coaster. As we move forward in the off-season, the year is now 1920 and the planning of the coaster is complete. A.J. Duffy has an agreement with the famed Philadelphia Toboggan Company to build Rocky Glen's second and largest coaster to date. Henry Auchie was the founder of the Philadelphia Toboggan Company and also the company's president in this time frame, and he has tasked legendary coaster designer John A. Miller to plot out the coaster tracks for use in the tricky terrain in front of the dam. The construction supervisor for the project was famed future coaster designer Herbert Schmeck. They wanted to capture the picturesque dam with its water flowing underneath the coaster, along with the beautiful scenic mountain range that makes up today's Montage Mountain. Coupled with the Laurel line passing right underneath its planned overpass, they felt they had a gem of a coaster that would draw people for many years to come. The announcement is made in spring that Rocky Glen will be adding several larger rides to the park and that the new coaster would be ready around July 3rd of 1920. The anticipation grows because of its sheer size, and people traveling to Rocky Glen by the Laurel line cannot miss its gigantic appeal when arriving at the Laurel line station. Unfortunately, it does not open in July as work continued on its structure, with August now being the target opening month. Finally, on August 5th, 1920, the newly christened Mountain Dips coaster opened to the public for the first time at Rocky Glen Park. The mountain dips opened with great enthusiasm from both locals, the press, and persons within the amusement park business as far away as Philadelphia who came to glimpse the enormous structure. A dinner was held at the famed Swiss Cottage, which feted all of these constituents, who later rode the coaster and boasted about its thrills. Its sheer size was something the Lackawanna and Wyoming valleys had not seen yet. So let's talk about the coaster itself. Most roller coasters usually begin by leaving the station and making its way to the lift hill or the chain that takes you to the top of the highest hill. But the unique shape and location of this coaster allowed the lift hill to actually be in the middle of the ride instead of the beginning. Because the coaster started at the upper part of the park where all the rides were, it used gravity to take it out of the station and through the first half of the ride. It was shaped like an upside-down letter V or letter U, and it's really the best way to describe it. Of course, in this time frame, the coaster also had a tunnel in the beginning. But Andy, why do some coasters have tunnels? What's the point? Well, back in the day, it wasn't proper for a guy who likes a girl to hold hands and walk around and kiss and hug or anything that we take for granted today. So 100 years ago, or even 120 years ago, that's just not something you did. So what the carnival operators and amusement park operators did is they created dark rides, fun houses, tunnels in the roller coaster. So what you would do is when you would leave the station, you'd enter a tunnel. That tunnel in the darkness would give you that 10 seconds or even longer to get that smooch in with your girlfriend and boyfriend, which you couldn't do out in the open. So you got away from your chaperone and your parents, you went for a ride, you got that kiss in, you went for the ride around the coaster and came around, and then when you got off, it was like nothing happened. Same thing with dark rides. Now, Rocky Glen had one called the Tokyo Canal, which was a water ride. It's called an old mill, as they used to call it. And back then, it was the same concept. You'd get in the boat, you'd float around into the dark area, and then it'd give you your chance to get a kiss, but you couldn't do that out in the open. And these attractions are what gave you that opportunity. So those of you who have ridden the Phoenix has a nice long tunnel. The whole point of the tunnel is not to be scary. That was the precursor before you hit the lift hill, so you could get your kiss in and hold your significant other really tight before you got on the ride. That's why fun houses and tunnels of love and all those things existed. Today it's a little bit different because now that we can be more open in our society, you don't see it that often. Haunted houses are there to scare you as opposed to giving you that chance to get away from your parents or your chaperone to sneak a kiss. Let's get back to the video. The coaster was called one of the largest in the East, especially in our area. As seen on the side of this souvenir from the 20s, it was referred to as the largest coaster in northeastern Pennsylvania. Now let's look at some of the existing pictures of the coaster after it leaves the station. You'll notice that the first trip is the lower tracks. After coming out of the tunnel, it makes a small dip and then goes down before hitting the turnaround. You will notice several things in this picture. The tracks go over the Laurel Line tracks. It passes right in front of the dam, and the water actually ran underneath the coaster, which added to its allure and sights. If you look closely, there are pumps used to help move water over the dam. These have been removed at some point over time. This picture is actually taken from the top of the lift hill. This shot is from the top of the turnaround on the lift hill. You can see that both the lift hill and the big drop, that's the first drop after the lift hill, are connected by wood. Notice the dips on both the lift hill and the big drop. The return trip uses the higher parts of the tracks to get back to the station on the hill. This is an extended shot of the Laurel Line station, and the Mountain Dips lift hill is just here on the upper left. Notice it was connected to the Laurel Line station itself. This would be removed in later years, and there would be a gap between the station and the coaster. Also to note, the first bridge over Old Rocky Glen Road is in the background, as it has a curved shape to it. The later bridge was angled on both sides, but then flat in the middle. This picture is during construction of the coaster in 1920. As you can see, people standing on the tracks. Notice on the far right that the coaster actually was built into the dam. Extreme right, you can see the water going over the dam. In the distance, you can see the lift hill and the turnaround. That, of course, is the part near the Laurel line. This picture looks to be the same as the previous picture, but we're looking in the opposite direction. Again, your back is against the dam here, and you're looking at the return tracks that went to the higher part of the turnaround. This picture was taken from the upper part of the park and gives you a complete view of the turnaround. Notice that there are people swimming in the outlet and are on the dam. This was not a public part of the park, so essentially these people weren't patrons of the park. This picture was also taken from the upper part of the park. While showing a great portion of the coaster down in the valley in front of the dam, it was also important that it showed us where the location of the Jazz Railway was, which is just in the bottom right of this picture, which only was at the park for 3 years from 1925 to 1927. In the 80s, this would be about where the Dodgems building was. This picture shows a shot from the Laurel Line tracks, looking at the overpass, and gives you a feel of what you'd see coming on the trolley to Rocky Glen. This shot from the lower lot parking area was in 1937, and cars were beginning their takeover as the primary means of travel. You can see the backside of the lift hill and the big drop, and also the Laurel Line station on the left here. You'll recall earlier I mentioned that the coaster and station were no longer connected. You can see that here, that there is a space in between. In this picture shot from the far side of the outlet, it shows a good portion of the whole coaster. Looking closely, you can see this is 1920 because there are parts of the coaster that are not completed. You'll also notice that the tunnel has not been built yet. That would be on the far tracks in this picture. And of course, the station Q is up here on the hill where all the rides were in Rocky Glen. Finally, looking back at the station, in this picture, Henry Aki is on the far left and Herbert Schmeck is third from the left. This is the only known picture of the Mountain Dips station. So that's a pictorial history of the Mountain Dips coaster, and that's basically every picture that's known to exist today. So let's go for a ride on the coaster. You might say, well, how is that possible? There is no video that's known to exist as of 2020. However, the coaster had a son, if you will. Our friends in Kennywood in Pittsburgh have a coaster that's known as the Jackrabbit. The Jackrabbit was also built by John Miller in 1920, and it's essentially almost the same exact design, with one difference. As mentioned, the Mountain Dips coaster was kind of like the letter V, an upside-down letter V. The Jackrabbit is more like a paperclip. So instead of the coaster going down and making a right turn to fill out the V, it actually loops around itself like a paperclip. But almost every bounce, turn, dip is almost identical. So I created this video that you're about to watch from an old video of the Jackrabbit from way back in the day. It was uploaded on YouTube by a user that uses the ID of Kennywood Me. So he's got a great little site dedicated to Kennywood. So watch this video and you'll see how the Mountain Dips coaster matches the Jackrabbit. Even though the Jackrabbit is a much smaller version and the Mountain Dips was a very big version, it's almost an identical coaster. So let's go for a quick ride. Okay, so here we go. On the Mountain Dips, we make a left coming out of the station, making the turn. We'd be entering the tunnel right about here. And now we're going straight over the Laurel Line tracks. Notice the straightaway. Going through the first dip right in front of the dam. Now here, our coaster goes to the right, but this particular coaster goes to the left to the lift hill. And there's the dip before the lift hill, and then straight into the lift hill itself, exactly like the mountain dips. So we go up, and then we reach the pinnacle at the top. Now you'd see the Laureline station straight ahead. Make the left, now you'd be going back down into the valley again, with a dip, and another dip, and then up into the top of the turnaround, making a left turn. And now you'd be able to see the dam right there on the right-hand side, and then we'd make that last dip and go right up over the Laureline tracks to a straightaway, right back into the station. So, that's pretty interesting, right? It almost is exactly the same, with that one exception. Once the mountain dips comes out of the tunnel and does a little dip in front of the dam, our coaster goes to the right and goes towards the lift hill, but the Jackrabbit goes to the left. That's the only difference in the rides, is one goes right and the other one goes left and loops around itself, like I said, like a paper clip. Let's fast forward to 1939 and find out the fate of the predecessor of the $1 Million Coaster. So Zeke, what happened to the coaster? Well, management went from A.J. Duffy to both P.J. Murphy and George Esslinger, who were both Laureline executives who ran the park, and then to Ben Sterling in 1936. For most of the golden age of Rocky Glen, it was status quo for the coaster. In September of 1939, 21-year-old Robert Russell was riding the coaster and stood up just after the big dip, and he was thrown from the ride. While people rushed to his aid, he was taken to Moses Taylor Hospital in Scranton. His parents had previously both passed away, and his grandmother, Elizabeth Russell, who was 73 years old, was also at the park and was the primary caretaker for this orphan. She made the eventual trip to Moses Taylor Hospital to see her grandson. Unfortunately, he was not in good shape, and the sight of her grandson in the condition caused her to experience a heart attack on the spot. She passed away, and only moments later, the grandson followed her as well. An evaluation of the coaster revealed safety deficiencies that were not regulated in 1920 when it was built, but now in 1939 were concerning. It was reported in December of 1939 that Ben Sterling made the decision to tear down the coaster rather than try to repair or correct it. So without warning to anyone, it was dismantled. It is only briefly mentioned being removed, and no pictures exist of the demolition. It is quietly announced in 1940 that the new rocket ride would be placed where the old coaster was located at the top of the hill. Sterling would later call the rocket ride junk. After 19 years, the mountain dips was now just a memory, but a memory lost in time. Over the years, the coaster would be forgotten, and even some people incorrectly merged this coaster's history with its sister coaster in the park, the Pippin, which was a part of the Nallen Jennings side of the park. Also, both coasters were generically referred to as giant coasters in a lot of the newspaper ads, which caused more confusion later in history, thinking that they're just simply called the Giant Coaster. It is important to note that Rocky Glen was the only park in our area that had two large wooden coasters at the same time, from 1924, when the Pippin coaster was built, until 1939, when the Mountain Dips was dismantled. And then again in 1946, when Sterling would later place a new coaster on his side of the park, which would eventually be known as the $1 Million Coaster. Rocky Glen would again have two coasters for the next 4 years until 1950, when the Pippin coaster burned in a fire in May of 1950. After that, Rocky Glen would only have a single coaster in the park from 1950 until 1987, when the park closes. Except for 1 year in 1958, between the $1 Million Coaster being dismantled and the Jet Coaster being built. They had no major coasters that year. Well, everyone, that's the history of the Mountain Dips coaster at Rocky Glen Park. I hope you enjoyed the video, I had a great time making it for you, and I hope it educated you a little bit on the early parts of Rocky Glen around 1919, 1920, the beginning of the Golden Age. So thanks again for watching the video. We'll see you around the Facebook group. If you're not a member of the group, please search us out on Facebook. We are Rocky Glen Park Memories. Also, I do have a YouTube channel that I upload these to, so if you're on YouTube, come over to Rocky Glen Park Memories on Facebook, like us, share the video. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of groups that want to know the history of the Mountain Dips coaster. I always stress this in the videos that remembering the history is important for our valley and our little park. So thanks again for watching the video. I'll come out with a new video soon. I'm not sure what subject I'll be broaching next, but you know, in the future, watch for a new video. It's going to be a different ride or something at the park. Maybe just random history or some myths or legends of the park. I know some of those are still floating out there that everybody wants to talk about. So like us, share us, and as I always leave everybody, my tagline: be Sterling in life. Named after Ben Sterling. Be Sterling in life, be nice to each other. Take care, and we'll see you around the group.
We went around time and again, it's Nickel Day at Rocky Glen. Hey, na, so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again, it's Nickel Day at Rocky Glen. Hey, na, so okie dokie, don't you know? Round and round again, it's Nickel Day at Rocky Glen.